Greetings, scholars, for our review on AP Euro Unit 11, Europe in the 1920s and 1930s, the period between World War I and World War II. I'm going over the review sheet from top to bottom, the effect of World War I on European mood compared to the preceding Belle Epoque, and the sense of optimism and progress before World War I is replaced by pessimism and suspicion and anger and fear after the war. Changes once the Bolsheviks/communists seized power in 1917. Well, they shut down the provisional government, they shut down the Duma, they set up a secret police, they take over churches and schools, they end all civil liberty, and there's the beginning of the building of this communist order. War communism refers to the seizure of what is called the commanding heights of production, the factories, the railroads, the banks. Lenin's NEP, that's the new economic policy. After World War I and after the Civil War, Russia's economy was in ruins. And from 1921 to 1928, Lenin and for a while Stalin allowed for what's called a mixed economy, allowed individuals to own small enterprises. So the government still controlled the major means of production, things like railroads and steel mills and banks, but small businesses were permitted. And this did allow the Russian economy to rebound. Now this ends in 1928 under Stalin. Leon Trotsky versus Stalin after Lenin's death. Well, there is a power struggle here, and Leon Trotsky, remember, he's the leader of the Red Army, and Stalin is the general secretary here of the Communist Party, and he has a lot of people beholden to him for bureaucratic appointments. But the argument here is going to be between Trotsky's vision of Marxism is one of supporting endless revolutions abroad, looking for protection by having your neighbors become communists. And Stalin is going to push for consolidating socialism in one country, entrenching communism in the new Soviet Union. The Comintern is this organization, short for Communist International. It's an organization to spread the communist revolution abroad, and this is it will be spreading communist parties that will be under the control of the Soviet Union's Communist Party. Stalin's 5-year plans, these are centralized economic plans pushing for rapid industrialization and collectivization. The goal here of collectivization is increased production on the farms will allow more workers to move to the cities to pursue industrialization to catch up to the West. Remember, collectivization is the takeover of private farms and the consolidation into larger state-run farms. There's technically two types of farms. There's the ones which are collective in the sense that they're owned by a huge number, maybe 1,000 farmers, and then you have the ones that are actually state-run. And for all practical purposes, collectivization are state farms. These are these multi-thousand-acre farms with many, many people living on them, and you're working for the group or you're working for the state. There is no private ownership anymore of land. The kulaks are independent farmers, and originally the kulaks were farmers who were relatively well off and free, and this is broadened under the communists to include any peasant who resists turning over their grain that's produced to Moscow. And Stalin is going to starve the kulaks, most famously in Ukraine. And the numbers, if you look for the numbers, nobody's counting how many died, but the low numbers are around 2 million, the high numbers are around 7 million. So Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the famous dissident, says that 6 million kulaks were killed in the 1930s. We're talking about millions of peasants who are basically starved. And what happens here is their food is their harvests are confiscated for use of the workers in the cities who are building the communist order here. So this is the deliberate starvation of obstreperous, stubborn, non-cooperative peasants, farmers. The goal of collectivization, remember, is to provide enough food or increased efficiency using machines on these collective farms so you can produce more for the people in the cities. Social realism in art, it glorifies the depiction of communist values, and typically you'll see these pictures of happy, hardworking communist laborers. The gulags refer to Soviet forced labor camps. It's estimated that under Stalin, about 14 million people were forced into these labor camps. You hear about people being sent east to Siberia, but they could be sent anywhere where there's work to be done. Communism and religion. Communism is based on the premise that oppression and division of wealth has a religious basis, but basically religion is in cahoots with the haves to con the poor into submission. So churches, most notably the Orthodox Church, but the communists went after Protestants, they went after Jews, they went after Muslims, they went after Catholics. The new Soviet Union destroyed, shut, or converted churches. They taught atheism in the schools. They arrested tens of millions of Christians for their faith. And it's estimated that under Stalin, starts under Lenin, but under Stalin, about 100,000 Orthodox priests, nuns, and monks are murdered. The Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 39, the sides in this war are the Republic. This is the elected democratic government, a coalition of left-wing parties, of socialists and communists, is going to do battle with Francisco Franco and the nationalists. And the nationalists are going to be led by this military coup here under Franco, but joining are going to be Catholic clergy, are going to be royalists, are going to be a fascist-inclined, in English we sometimes call it the Phalangists, but in Spanish it's the Falange Party. And this is a fascist party. Now, not everybody who is against the Republic, who are going to be fighting in this war, are part of the Falange, are fascists, but they are people who support the status quo, who support the wealthy landowners, who support the king, who support the Catholic Church. And this war will rage on for 3 years, and Franco will win, and there will be tens of thousands of Republicans who will be murdered, will be executed, and many more will flee. The allies to Franco are the Italians and the Germans, who send troops, who send warplanes, and the Russians will send not a significant amount of supplies for the beleaguered Republican government. As I'm going through the sheet here, I'm using Russians and Soviet Union interchangeably. Just keep in mind here, the Soviet Union, the largest piece is Russia, but the Soviet Union does ultimately include 15 republics, Russia being only one of them. Definitions of communism and fascism and totalitarianism. Well, communism is a system of common ownership of the means of production. By means of production, we refer to the factories, to the mines, to the farms. And one of the chief differences between the Soviet Union and Hitler and Mussolini, while all of these are totalitarian states, it is under communism that you have no private ownership of the means of production. You have no capitalism, you have no free enterprise. Of course, a big exception to this, a big asterisk, is that short period under the new economic policy where Lenin, in desperation to revive the Soviet / Russian economy, is going to allow some free enterprise, which will end under Stalin. Fascism is with the big F, the first fascist system is in Italy. And this is the belief that you need a strong, aggressive, unified state under one leader. Fascism is anti-communist, it is anti-democracy, it's anti-parliamentarianism, it's anti-individual rights, that the state must be all-powerful for prosperity, for national honor, for order. And fascism with a small f is also used to describe Spain under Franco and Germany under Hitler. But the fascist party with a capital F refers to an actual party that is being led by Benito Mussolini in Italy in the 1920s, preceding the Nazis by about a decade. Totalitarianism refers to when the state recognizes no limit on its total power. And the big difference here between Mussolini and Hitler and Stalin is Mussolini and Hitler will allow private ownership, much of it directed by the state, but private ownership nevertheless, which is not permitted in the Soviet Union. But what's common in all three of these dictatorships is control of the state, control of schools, control of churches, either by shutting them down in the Soviet Union or co-opting them and coercing them in Italy and in Germany, interference with the family, and a certain amount of direction of the economy. Use of media, culture, propaganda by totalitarians. Well, you have the use of schools to indoctrinate kids. You have youth organizations in these countries. You have the use of radio and newspaper and movies and plays and posters, and you censor you censor the press, and you threaten arrest, you threaten exile, you threaten incarceration, and you have a certain amount of self-censorship minimally in Germany and Italy, but certainly the government will run the press in the Soviet Union. Why did the Weimar Republic fail between 1917 and 1933, or why did the Nazis come to power? Economic problems followed the end of World War I. You have reparations payments, you have inflation, you have later unemployment, you have the humiliation of Versailles, you have political chaos, you have these sort of private armies like the stormtroopers under Hitler's Nazi party. And collectively, the government here, the people have lost faith in the government to keep order, to bring prosperity, to bring justice, to bring honor. And you've got these parties vying with each other for an answer, and the extremists are going to ascend. Who did the Nazis blame for Germany's woes? Well, they blamed internal backstabbers for the loss that Germany had in World War I. They blamed the Jews, they blamed communists, they blamed socialists, they blamed liberals, they blame unionists. Mein Kampf is this blueprint for a restored, powerful Germany. The author, of course, is Adolf Hitler. The roots of anti-Semitism in Europe from the 1800s onward. Well, you have nationalism, the idea that a nation of French or Germans or Spaniards or whomever, the Jews are not part of this nation. They are sort of a fifth column. How could they be loyal? They don't fit in. You have this idea of social Darwinism, that Jews are inferior, not just because of their religious beliefs, because of their suspect nationalism and patriotism, but their actual blood is inferior. And you have the writings of Arthur Gobineau and Houston Stewart Chamberlain long before Hitler espousing this toxic idea of anti-Semitism. And then you have, examples of Jewish individuals who are pointed to as examples of what Jews caused. For example, Karl Marx was a secular Jew, but he was a Jew, and communism is blamed on Jews. And you have Sigmund Freud, who's Jewish, and sort of the dirty pornographic thought of Freud, as is accused of being, is pinned on Jews. So Jews are they're seen as disloyal, they're seen as being money grubbers, they're seen as being agitators and revolutionaries and immoral, and the old Christ killer thing is still going on here, and the Jews just in so many ways do not fit for those who choose not to include them. The Night of the Long Knives, Hitler had Ernst Röhm, who was the leader of the stormtroopers. The SA had him put to death along with about 1,000 stormtroopers in this elimination of potential rivals. And what he's doing here is he's eliminating potential rivals. He's also appeasing the army, which doesn't really want this many 100,000 man paramilitary around. How did Hitler gain power in 1933? Well, he wins a plurality, not a majority, but he wins 33% in a free election, and he is appointed chancellor by President Hindenburg, who fears that the left may coalesce into a majority coalition. So Hitler, the thinking is that he can be controlled, and that it's better him than the left, and Hitler will work to undermine the government which he is elected to and legally appointed to be chancellor over, and eventually he will essentially work to become a dictator. Hitler used what means of production and culture. This is really a repeat of the use of media, culture, propaganda by totalitarians. Hitler's going to, there's going to be the Hitler Youth. There's going to be the use of movies and plays and posters and newspapers and radio and taking over the schools. There's going to be this indoctrination around the clock. Basic beliefs of the Nazi Party before and after taking power. Well, the goal here is economic recovery at first, military rearmament, starting a draft, ending any agreement with the Versailles Treaty, pursuing ultimately Lebensraum, which is this living room, living space in Eastern Europe. Places like Poland, Ukraine, and Russia are destined to be under Nazi tutelage, and the Slavic people basically enslaved or exterminated. You have censorship. You have use of secret police. You have the arrest and the eventual killing of enemies, and this includes trained unionists and socialists and communists, and eventually, after 1942, Jews and gypsies. What other famous German took over education to strengthen German nationalism after 1871? Otto von Bismarck. Remember the Culture Kampf, this idea that it's important to control schools, to control the education of young people so that everybody will be on the same page here. The fate of the Social Democratic Party, the Catholic Center Party, the Communist Party in Germany under Hitler, these political parties are destroyed. They are crushed, and their members are arrested, put in prison, many of them killed. Remember, under fascism, there should be one strong leader that the state can unify behind. That is der Führer in Germany. That is Il Duce in Italy. It is Generalissimo Franco in Spain. Lebensraum, again, this is the idea of living space, that the German people, the superior Aryan, the superior Nordic Teutonic race, should have space to expand, and Hitler is going to move east. I remember September, well, we haven't covered this quite yet, but on September 1st, 1939, Germany will invade Poland, officially starting World War II. The Versailles Treaty and the Nazis. The Nazis ignore the Versailles Treaty. They build up the army beyond the permitted limit. They build up military equipment. They restore an air force. They reoccupy the Rhineland. And at every turn, the former allies do nothing. The Nuremberg Laws, after Hitler comes to power, take away Jewish citizenship. They forbid intermarriage between Aryans or Germans and Jews. They exclude from the civil service all Jews and from all government-regulated professions such as education and in the schools and universities and the medical profession. Jews are basically relegated to menial labor. As far as the final solution, the killing, the mass murder, the genocide of European Jews, it begins not right away. The first people Hitler goes against, and if you ever read Mein Kampf, which is kind of this, it's actually kind of a boring book because it's going to talk about all of the different political parties and how they're all wrong and how they're terrible for Germany. Hitler goes against his political enemies. The second largest political party at the time Hitler comes to power is the Communist Party. So he's going after these people, and then later it's going to be sort of really an evolution. He's going to go after the Jews. It's going to start with the intimidation, the harassment, the expropriation of property, encouraging Jews to immigrate and taking their property before they leave. And this is going to eventually evolve to killing them and to a very organized extermination through death camps, through these concentration camps. Europe's first fascist state, again, is Italy. Why the rise of Mussolini and fascism in Italy? The fear of communism is one of the key things here. The Germans and the Spanish and the Italians are looking at what's going on in the Soviet Union, and they're seeing priests and nuns and monks and Christians arrested and killed by the thousands. About 100,000 clergy alone are killed. They're looking at private property, farms and businesses and factories being taken over. So there's this fear, and after the war in Italy, there's inflation, there are strikes, there's land seizures. The Communist Party is very strong in Italy. And what they're seeing in Russia, they do not want to happen in Italy, and Benito Mussolini is going to promise that he is a defender against Marxism, as is Hitler. Hitler promises to defend the German people from the spread of Bolshevism, of communism. Mussolini and the Catholic Church. Mussolini is smart in that he signs a treaty with the Pope, with the Vatican, in which he gives the Vatican City, that part of Rome, back to the Pope, back to the Catholic Church. He pays an indemnity for church property that had been taken over. He agrees to make Catholicism the official religion of Italy, and to boot, he marries his mistress. Now, keep in mind, Benito Mussolini has been living with his mistress as a common law wife, but he is going to have this public marriage, and Mussolini is going to co-opt the church. The church is, very concerned. In Spain, and in the Soviet Union, you have the killing of thousands and thousands of clergy by leftists, by the Soviets or by leftists in Spain. Mussolini's corporate state, this is the idea that the state should organize the economic sector into subgroups, and these subgroups will make collective decisions. They'll mediate between workers and the capitalist business owners, and the idea here is order, is efficiency, and arbitration instead of strikes, which will waste work hours. And what happens here is it's sort of like in the Soviet Union, it's very inefficient production. But this is not quite the same as the takeover of private business, but it certainly is a very strong direction for steel mills and cement factories and so forth to belong to a larger corporate group producing for the greater common good. Problems facing Eastern European states after World War I, well, there's many unhappy minorities within their borders. You have in Czechoslovakia about 3 million Germans in the Sudetenland. You have Germans in Poland. You have a multiplicity of ethnic groups that historically have been at each other in places like Yugoslavia. You have no democracy anywhere in Eastern Europe with the exception of Czechoslovakia. And you have trade relationships are interrupted with the rearranging of borders and these nations throwing up tariffs to protect their own industry. And basically you have poverty and you have unemployment and you have, trade has been killed, and you have either dictatorships or you have monarchs and you have military coups, and you've got Bela Kun temporarily overthrowing the government of Hungary until the military throws him out. So you just have this disorder in Eastern Europe. In France sort of as a symbol of French anxiety, they built this Maginot Line along the border of Luxembourg and Germany. They didn't build it along the border of Belgium because they didn't want to insult the Belgians, but the Germans will march around this thing like they did in World War I in just a few weeks when World War II starts. But the Kellogg-Briand Pact is this attempt. The French are looking for allies. They're looking for signatories on a pact to collectively keep the peace basically against the Germans, and the Kellogg-Briand Pact is going to grow and evolve into this agreement that nations will not go to war to settle international disputes. And it's signed by everybody. It's signed by about 40 nations in Europe and by us Americans. And it's kind of a naive, desperate attempt to avoid war. And certainly nobody wants to go through the bloodshed of World War I. So there's a certain amount of perhaps misplaced hope that by signing a piece of paper this can stop aggression. The radical right is going to gain support in France for a number of reasons. Same fears that the Germans and the Irish have, the fear of the spread of communism. But there's going to be, under Leopold Bloom, you have this this Popular Front, this sort of socialist communist coalition that is not going to do a very good job of addressing the problems of the Great Depression. And they're going to increase government the Popular Front is going to increase government regulation. They're going to be very pro-union. They're going to pursue nationalization. So right before the Germans are marching in, there's going to be a right-wing government that is going to be arguing about to turn back the dial here, turn back the clock on what the Popular Front had done. So you have this argument in France between left and right, which is weakening the government right before the Germans are invading in 1940. The effects of high tariffs set by the U.S. on trade in the 20s and 30s. Well, mutual trade will decrease between Europe and the United States, between Europe and North America because of these tariffs. The Europeans do some of this tit for tat. They throw up tariffs against us, and the two most prosperous places on the planet, the Europeans and the Americans, are not buying and selling to each other. And there's a lot of arguments over what is the cause of the Great Depression and what is the most important variable in this economic collapse, but certainly one piece of it is the interference with free trade by countries trying to protect their own industry at the expense of others. The effect of the Great Depression on Europe is high unemployment, pessimism, anger, fear, looking for solutions outside of democracy. And here's where you have the growth of authoritarian/totalitarian regimes in Eastern Europe and in Germany and in Italy. The democratic countries of France and Britain will increase government spending on work projects, and these democracies will survive. At least in Great Britain, France will have that temporary interruption under Nazi invasion from 40 to till the end of the war. Last thing I have on here, there's an old AP question asking you to compare and contrast absolute monarchs with 20th century dictators, and just some thoughts on that. Let's go back to James I and Charles I, these first Stuart kings in Great Britain. Remember their insistence that no bishop, no king, you must have the Anglican bishop as your bishop, or you are acting in rebellion against the British monarch. So the Anglican Church, the Church of England, is imposed as a means of uniformity, and this attempt to force the Book of Common Prayer, which is the book of the Anglican Church, on the Scots leads to this invasion under Charles I and throws Great Britain into this revolution between Parliament and the King. And you have the ship tax under Charles I, and you have Charles I shutting Parliament down, and you have these things that are happening. These are ways of declaring one's supremacy over Parliament. Louis XIV in France, he's winning the Wars of the Fronde against the nobility, and this is a big contrast here with the result of the English Civil War here, where Oliver Cromwell will defeat Charles I and cut his head off. You have the intendant system, the system of royal visits and inspection and regulation of the nobles in the provinces, and you have the building of Versailles, and this requiring nobles to have attendance there. And as far as Peter the Great goes, you have his war against Sweden and his building of St. Petersburg, kind of aping the building of Versailles. St. Petersburg is going to be built from scratch here on the shores of the Baltic. He's going to be trying to build this window to the west, turning Russia to the west. You have the table of ranks, and this is this system of hierarchy where you need to serve in the bureaucracy or in the military to receive favors from the Tsar. And you have, very symbolically here, you have Peter forcing Western customs on the boyars, on the nobility, having them not shave their beards and wear Western clothing instead of Russian attire. So just some thoughts here as we head into the test, which this is the review sheet for. Study well, study hard, study smart. I will see you soon.